So in the spirit of the day, you are at school and embarking on a new adventure. We'd like to ask you to give us what you think in terms of what these numbers look like. So if you could just jot down total number of students, how many students do you, some of you probably know from the keynote this morning, the number of students enrolled in New York City, K to 12. How many students are we serving and educating? So once you have your number down, okay. How many of those students, and we can work from a percentage here, how many of them speak a language other than English at home?
It's okay, you can take a guess.
Okay. You totally take a guess. We might check some of your answers, but the third question is, of the students enrolled in New York City, how many of them were born in another country? And then the last one is, how many languages are spoken by New York City public school students? And the reason we're starting with this exercise is we want to make sure you have a really strong sense of the complexity of the public school system in New York City. It's a very special place. It's a very complex place. And that'll help facilitate the rest of the conversation. So you ready? Everyone ready? Numbers are down? All right.
So can we get a guess from the audience for the first one? Anyone?
1.1 billion.
You said billion?
Million.
Million? Okay, so you listened to the keynote. So it is 1.1 million students are in the New York City Public School. So New York City Public School is the largest school, the largest school district in the country and one of the largest urban school districts in the world. So the next one, Can we have anyone want to take a guess?
90%.
Okay, so students enroll who speak a language other than English at home. Actually, 41%. Okay. So can we have another volunteer? For the next one, students enrolled in New York City Public School were born in another country. So born outside of the United States. It's okay, Rita.
Maybe 60%.
60? 47%. So about half of the 1.1 million students are born outside the United States. It's really interesting, right? And then
Last one, languages spoken. We have 120, we have 182, and I heard 40 something. Okay, quite a range. 150.
And that number actually is probably a little bit north of that. So that's an approximate. It's anywhere from 150 to 160 languages, because there's also dialects. Okay, so now we got you thinking. So we're going to continue on. Let's see. Keep your pens and paper out. So now we're going to start talking
So now
about.
shifting to English language learners, that was the general population, specifically focused on English language learners. These are the students who, when they identify a language other than English at home, they're giving an assessment. And then we determine whether they have enough English proficiency, or if they do not, they become English language learners and receive additional support. So how many of all those students that we identified previously, we said 40% of them approximately, of the 1.2 million students speak a language other than English. How many of them do you believe are identified as ELLs?
Close to 500,000 from the number.
Close to 500,000? You say half of them?
Yeah, but you said 40% out of
40% speak a language other than English at home. They may be proficient in English. So how many of those do you think are not proficient in English and require support? 30?
Of the 40, of the 40, I would say 80%
So we're 80%.
of the 40.
So what about a number, an actual number?
So of the about 400,000 students, how many of them are ELLs?
Of the how many?
400,000.
400,000.
We have a quarter- 280,000? Okay,
All right,
let's
so we
see.
have a lot of guesses.
So we're serving, our office is responsible for serving 157,000 students, which exceeds the population of Montana, the entire state. So that's our charge of our office.
So the next big one.
Okay, and so this will be, hopefully this is still getting you thinking. Can you name the top 10 languages? Spanish, you're in, definitely. That's the #1 most prevalent language, which represents over 80%. Second,
Creole. Creole.
Write it down. And
Write it
then
down.
let's see.
I hear many different languages. I haven't heard the #2 yet.
Write it.
Write your 10. We gave you the one.
10?
The
Write
top
your 10.
10 language. The top.
You have your 10 down? I still see people writing. A few more
Give us-
minutes?
Give us a thumbs up if you're finished.
Okay, thumbs up. Are you ready? For the reveal, here it comes. I see many thumbs. So Chinese is our second, followed by Bengali, Arabic, Haitian Creole, Russian, Urdu, French is #8. Uzbek and Punjabi.
Yeah. No, French Creole is #5.
Yeah, Haitian Creole.
Haitian Creole. French, probably from all the countries in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
It's a growing population.
Exactly.
What's interesting about these languages is that it shifts year to year. So in this past year, we saw a 30% decrease in the number of students who identify Korean as their home language. So it changes drastically year to year. But these have been the top 10, I would say, pretty consistently. And then the last point that we feel is really important to raise is that 69% of our ELLs receive free lunch, which is higher than the citywide average, which is 55% of New York City students receive free lunch. Before we continue the conversation, the next point that we really want to make sure we cover is when we talk about ELLs, oftentimes we talk about them as one group, but it's a very diverse group within that label. So starting with newcomers, these are students who have arrived to our country and have received between 0 and 3 years of service. They represent 61% of our ELLs. After they've received 3 years, they shift to the next category, which is ELLs with 4 to 6 years of service. We're not sure what the best label yet, so that's why it's a little awkward, but they're not quite long-term ELLs, but they're no longer newcomers. Once they shift into the 6 years of service or more, they become long-term ELLs. And the reason for that is that we've identified once they've exceeded that mark, it becomes much more difficult for them to test out of the ELL status. The average length of stay under the label English language learner is about 2.5 years. So most students within that window have tested to the English proficient category. At the 6th year, we've identified that there's a much larger representation of these students who are identified as students with disabilities. So it's a factor of language acquisition, but also may be influenced by learning disabilities as well. So it's a very unique population that demands different supports than the other categories. Likewise, ELLs that are also identified as students with disabilities, they are identified at double the rate of their English proficient peers. So the average is about 10% of our student population is identified as students with disabilities. 20% of ELLs are identified as students with disabilities. So it definitely raises the question about what we're doing in our system and how we're identifying and differentiating between, is this a language acquisition that requires time, or is this a true learning disability? The next category is students with interrupted formal education, also known as SIFE. New York City is a leader in this area of coming up with both the category, creating a curriculum and an identification tool, and identifying the best practices for serving students with interrupted formal instruction. Students receive this identification category when they have gaps in their education of about 2 years, and are also performing 2 or more years below their peers. And then the last category is students who are now former ELLs, and they represent 12% of our ELLs. They no longer require services, they become English proficient. Okay, so hopefully this is helpful to having additional conversations.
So is there an age range that's more popular for students arriving here, or it's just totally varied?
Good question. So our largest, when we look at elementary school, middle school, and elementary school, our largest group is in elementary school. And as you look from K to 5, they consistently reduce in the number because they're testing out. Our next largest group is in high school, grade 10. So many of our students who are also identified as SIFE and are coming new and arriving in this country, often unaccompanied by an adult, are in high school, 10th grade.
Also, what about the ELL students that are part of the adult continuum program? Are they considered?
So after age 21, we are not including them in this category, but they still have similar needs, and the categories would remain the same. We're counting in these numbers K to 12.
So just to add, so in New York State, you have the right to receive a public education up to the age of 21, and then in New York City public schools, would be students that would go into what's a transfer school or a District 79. So they have a separate school district that supports those students.
Additional questions?
I have a question. The population of the students, when they don't test out after the 2.5 years, do you find that that it's like harder to get, like if you know that you suspect there could be a language or some learning disability, is it harder to get services for students because of their title, ELL,
Is it harder for them to get access to special education services?
or to even be, like your interventions because they don't want, they have that title of ELL?
RTI.
So we partner with, the role of our office is to partner with every other office to ensure that they're using the lens that's appropriate to serve ELLs appropriately. So within our office, we have institutes, RTI, response to intervention, exactly for those needs. And one of the groups you see outlined here and highlighted are highlighted for a reason. It's because we are focusing specifically on serving them and identifying the best approaches and ensuring that within our schools, teachers understand they're not just an L, they're an L within distinct groups and categories. So we think we're doing a very good job in terms of making it more known. Our trainings specifically are targeted to teachers of special education. And what we're doing is we are targeting the groups that do the identification process before they get both labels to ensure that I think many of our identification teams and school-based teams think that more is better. And so when they see a delay in language acquisition, they want to give the special education label sometimes because they think the students will get more services. But we want to ensure that it's truly representation of their needs and the appropriate services. Did that answer your question?
Any other questions on the population, subpopulations? Okay, great. So now that we have an idea of the number of students that are, and we're targeting New York City because we are in New York City, and also because New York City is the largest percentage of English language learners in the country. And what we really want to kind of ground you in is really what governs ELL education, because there are regulations, there are laws that protect our students, and that they also provide them with rights and access to certain services. So I want to take you first to Lau versus Nichols, which was in 1974 in San Francisco. Some of you may be familiar with this. This was a civil rights, a part of the civil rights movement. It was around providing Chinese students with bilingual education. So really this is the hallmark of what really started bilingual education. It started in San Francisco. At the same time that in San Francisco, where they were really fighting for the rights for students who are new to our country, we also had a similar thing that they were doing in New York City, which was the Espita Consent Decree. So the Espita Consent Decree is a New York City focus. So basically this is to make sure that we are providing in New York City, that they are providing students who are identified as English language learners with the opportunity to participate in a bilingual program. And then we also have another aspect is what at the state level. So CR Part 154 is the regulations and really what are the mandates that we as a school district, all the school districts across New York State has to follow. So that really provides guidance around what are the instructional programs that English language learners have to participate in, what is the amount of time that they actually have to be in the ES to receive ESL services. So this is really at the state level. And then what really ties the funding, what supports English language learners is Title III. This is at the federal level. Questions? Okay. So something that's really interesting, so I mentioned to you CR Part 154, which is at the state level. So at the state level, it mandates that if a parent that enters to a school district in New York State, so we'll use New York City, so a parent that enters, a student that enters into the New York City school system, the parent will fill out something that's called a home language survey. That home language survey basically will indicate if a language is spoken other than English at home. And then if it's in that home language survey, it identifies that they do speak a language other than English at home, that triggers that there's additional assessments to assess if that child would need ELL services. What we find is that so once the student goes through the assessment process, which is called NICETEL, formerly LabR, and it turns out that they are identified as an English language learner, then the parent has to select between 3 different program models. This is what the state has dictated. There's 3 programs. So you have bilingual, transitional bilingual education, you have dual language, and then you also have ESL. So those are the 3 programs that parents have the right to select from. But what's interesting in New York City is that our parents are selecting at 79% ESL. And then about approximately 19%, and actually this should be 19% dual language and transitional bilingual programs is what they are opting for. So one of the things that we face as a challenge is that we as an office and as the Department of Education, we recognize the benefits and the long-term benefits of being in a dual language, in a bilingual program, but so many of our parents are opting for ESL.
And so what's important to distinguish between these 3 programs is that ESL is conducted obviously only in English.
Mm-hmm.
The entire program's goal is English proficiency, period. Bilingual programs, whether it's TBE or dual language, the goal is bilingualism or proficiency in English and the second language. And that's very distinct in that selection process. But again, most of our parents are overwhelmingly picking ESL.
So is one better than the other, or what's the historical thinking?
One is definitely better than the other. So we have found that native language instruction, whether it's TBE or dual language, students who participate in those programs have much better outcomes. Educating students in their first language and developing literacy within that home language first, it becomes a very solid foundation for then adding additional languages. And so students who take what they know, they've been home with their parents speaking their language for 5 years, if they enter the classroom, we know that recognizing their culture, recognizing their language, and building from there ultimately leads to better outcomes, and students who have participated in these programs actually have better academic outcomes than English proficient students in general.
So why do we do the other?
So, because a parent knows best. It's our responsibility to honor parent choice. And so we are here today to have this conversation with you. If the research says one thing and parents are choosing overwhelmingly a different option, it's our responsibility to honor parent choice, but what can we do in a way that's respectful of the child's first teacher to make sure that we're being both sensitive to what the parent wants and meeting the needs of the child in the way we see as educators and researchers and parents is the best approach.
In many cases, parents are not aware of the exact definition of each one or the other. ESL, we don't know exactly what it is. Many people, even teachers, they say, oh, you teach ESL, oh, you speak Spanish. They don't know. They think sometimes they think that ESL and Spanish are closely connected and one license. Sometimes other teachers, they might think ESL is purely English. So to go to that end, I'm trying to say that many of the ESL parents do not know the terminology that we have to make choices to choose.
So the first issue is parent misinformation or an incomplete sense of the program goals. I saw you had a question.
Yeah, it was a similar question. How are parents being educated to know
Okay.
the difference?
So how are parents being educated?
I'm just wondering how do these numbers compare to the services that are currently offered in the city? Like how many schools have dual language programs?
This is very closely correlated to what we offer in the city, very closely, because we have to meet parent choice.
I wanted to know, in terms of the ESL program, having a sort of, I guess, a native concept of honoring the L1 with the ESL instruction, would that prompt for any difference? Because I personally feel sided towards that, to use the L1 or the native language of the ELL in order to strengthen and further instruction in the L2, which in this case would be the English language. I wanted to see what your thoughts were on that in terms of kind of using the L1 as a foundation to further L2 instruction.
So just to give you a little background about where I come from, I just transitioned to the Office of English Language Learners. The past 20 years I spent at this dual language middle school as teacher and principal so that's where my heart lies, and I believe that's the best approach. But I'm
curious to know, with so many languages, can the Department of Education actually deliver a valid program in dual language as strong as it could be, considering the number of languages? And having been in schools for many years, having walked through the hallways of schools, I have seen some really lousy language in teachers in programs that are dual language. So I've seen classrooms where they're bilingual classrooms with Spanish, which is a language that I know I'm pretty fluent in both, where there are actually spelling errors, and so how do you account for the validity of the outcomes in the number of languages?
So we've raised 3 different issues, which I think are the core of why we're here, and we would love to discuss. The first is, how are we informing parents, and what are our responsibilities in that process, and what does it look like in New York City? The second is program quality, and the third is, which is the best approach. So we'll start with I think the most straightforward. New York City is responsible for informing parents at that first point of contact and enrollment. We have school-based staff. Each school, it has an identified person responsible for conducting that survey. They're supposed to walk through that form and guide parents. We've created a video where the school can click onto the video. It's offered in the top 10 languages, and it ensures that parents get the same message in a balanced way, informing them about the options. The question then becomes, though, are schools using that resource? Who is conducting the survey, and what is their personal stance in terms of what they see best? Because we know many of our parents are heavily influenced by that school personnel who they're interfacing with. So we're meeting the requirements of the state and our regulations in terms of providing that information. We've exceeded by creating a video, and yet that question constantly lingers and is raised. Are we doing everything we can to make sure our parents are informed and have the best picture of the outcomes for their children given which program they choose? The second question that was raised about program quality is another struggle for us. Bilingual education has only been around since 1970s. We're still learning, we're still growing, but the truth remains that our teachers, one, we do not have very many teachers who are bilingually certified. We are investing and partnering with university partners. We're recruiting heavily, advertising, and yet we have a shortage in that area. Add on content certified bilingual teachers, and now we're looking at a real deficit and gap and shortage in having the number of people we want in front of our students. So we know finding a certified math teacher, science teacher, we already feel like if you can find a quality teacher to put in front of your students, you really feel lucky. To find one that is bilingual in Chinese, Bengali, etc., becomes much more difficult. And then one unspoken piece around that is many of our parents are graduates of bilingual education themselves. and feel this sense of fear because they didn't learn English to the level that they would have liked. And so we really have our hands full with making sure not only they're informed about the choices and they understand the steps forward we've taken to better prepare our educators and to provide guidance in the field.
Yeah.
So should we continue and then we'll.
I just have a question. So do you think that the most positive outcome of dual language programs may be skewed because parents are aware that the quality of the program may not be up to par, so thus they may not choose it, and may also be skewed because there's a recognition that you do not have certified professionals in both language and content. So there may be a skew there.
Well, what's interesting though is that we are in strong demand. If you look at our calendars in terms of where we spend our time engaging with communities, we're in high demand to meet with families and communities who want dual language instruction. The most interesting part is that they're not ELLs. And they're English proficient families, and typically they are of a very high socioeconomic status. So our families who are entitled to the service and the students who would most benefit from it are not the ones who are advocating for it. Instead, we're regularly meeting with communities in Chelsea, and I mean, we're all over the city. Japanese programs, which didn't make the top 10 list. Italian did not make the top 10 list, and we have the consulates calling us and saying, we want you, come meet with us. We have a community that's very well organized and very active, and they want to make this happen for their children, predominantly heritage speakers. So it's the benefits of dual language instruction are well known. The benefits within certain communities and the benefits of bilingualism are recognized. It's a matter of how do we get our families who are entitled through CR Part 154 and who we know whose children would get the most benefit from participating in those programs in terms of academic programs, both to choose in and then to activate and organize themselves in order to increase access. The highest number of programs are not necessarily where the highest density of ELLs currently live. So, yes.
So do you know the percentage of students who actually do thrive with just ESL as opposed to dual language? And also, is it possible that most parents don't pick the dual language program because they are proficient in English, so they feel that putting them in the ES program will make them proficient? Because I know there are some students who actually translate for their parents, so maybe they feel that just going straight for English will benefit them and they'll have a better opportunity as far as careers because they'll be more efficient. Even though you feel that they don't do it better, maybe some parents feel that because they don't speak English, this might be an opportunity for their children to have.
Absolutely. When we speak to parents, that's definitely what they say to us. They have chosen ESL because they want to ensure their children speak English and speak English well. They know that it's a survival skill. Again, many of our ESL students are the ones who are going to court with their families, to the doctor with their families, and taking on very adult responsibilities in order to support their families who have not learned English yet. So maybe we should hold questions for once. We were afraid we weren't going to have an interactive group, so we're happy. This is great. But I think your questions are exactly the kinds of questions that we are struggling with and looking to engage broader communities with to ensure that we're getting every possible idea for how we can get in there and make sure, one, we get the message out, we get information out, we can provide parents with an understanding in a way that's friendly to them, and then ensure that when they pick, we are strongly committed to honoring whatever option they choose. We just want to be more certain that they're making a choice that's informed. In terms of the academic outcomes of ELLs who are in ESL, the data is very blurry here because, speaking back to the point raised earlier, when we talk about dual language programs, if we went on a school visit right now and went to visit 5 in the closest proximity and they were called dual language, when you talk to the school leader about how students spend their time in terms of allocation of language, and you look at who's enrolled, it's very diverse. So each school has their own interpretation of what dual language instruction looks like, what TBE looks like, and what ESL looks like. But we want to get, before we couldn't send you out of this room with another key piece of information because we're counting on you to turnkey what you're learning today. So it's strategic strategy. So let's how within ESL, we want you to be really clear about how students are spending their time. So we know the big question that we framed this presentation on was, what's the role of general education teachers in providing quality educational experiences to ELLs? And we wanted to ensure that there was a clear understanding of how instructional time is spent. So on your paper, how much time do you think an ELL spends with their ESL teacher? And we've broken it down for you. Beginners have a different mandate than intermediate and advanced ELLs. So just ballpark, what percentage of their school week do you think ELL students spend with a certified ESL teacher or a mainstream teacher, either way you want to frame it? And while you're thinking that through, we just wanted to review with you, to meet the ESL requirement for New York State to become certified, teachers only spend 6 credit hours.
To become certified in New York State. So all you need is 6 semester hours in order to become a certified teacher in New York State, where we know it's one of the largest the populations of English language learners.
So a mainstream teacher, in order to become certified, only needs to spend 6 semester hours studying ESL.
Language acquisition, that's all.
All right, so everyone has their numbers? So what percentage do you think beginners spend with mainstream teachers?
I from my own experience, or I feel it's not much. I would say 20 to 30%.
20 to 30%? Do we have anyone else outside that range?
Okay.
So that's spot on. Beginners spend 80% of their school day with mainstream teachers. Only 20% of their time is spent. 360 minutes of the 1,900 minutes they spend in school a week. And then once you pass to intermediate and advanced levels, they spend 90% of their day with the mainstream teacher that has very little ESL training.
Yeah, I feel that's a very big problem. I'm an undergrad at KC, and we're under the TESOL, 5-year CCSO program there. And the main issue is, how can we make this relevant to the kid or child in a limited amount of time? You know, what strategies and tactics can we provide to the student with promoting language attitude, not only with the L1 but the L2. You know, it's becoming increasingly.
And just to add, this is New York State.
Right. Yeah.
So this varies by state. And we know that the L population is one of the fastest growing populations in this country. So each state varies as to the number of, some states don't even have any requirements for teachers to be certified and having any understanding of how to work with English language learners.
Well, we do know that the leader in the field is, in terms of improving academic outcomes for ELLs, is Florida. And if you look at their requirement for teachers, it's also the most intense. Mm-hmm. They have the largest requirement in terms of hours prior to beginning service.
I just have a question though, if I say that. I mean, wouldn't you say that, it's important to have that extra, knowledge, but that if schools are working collaboratively and teachers are working together and professional learning communities are really brainstorming for the needs of the students in their whole community, really understanding that can be very effective in the classroom. And there is a big benefit for the students that don't speak English at home to be in the classroom, getting that interaction and talk and the conversation and learning how to be a communicator. And that
Absolutely.
those are part of the important things that need to get out there to the school systems.
Absolutely. So we would never argue against collaboration and teachers working together. And I mean, the community that you describe with the professional learning community is good for all students. However, there are specific approaches for ELLs that are really important. And I can even start from the most basic entry point. When we have a student arrive to this country and we're teaching them how to read, to have a basic sense of understanding about the home language and an understanding that not all languages read from left to right. Some read from right to left, some top to bottom. and some are not even written. And having that sense of understanding and knowing that this is a basic conversation that you would have with a student who's coming from a country that speaks a different language, or even native born, because we know, as we showed, half of them born in this country. It's very important for teachers to have some basic strategies and understanding of how to work with different kinds of students. So we believe ESL training is very important. And I think another myth is that if you're in a bilingual program, you do not get ESL training. And in fact, bilingual programs are required to provide ESL as a part of the program. So we really want to emphasize that it's critical.
And I think one of the roles, so Claudia and I are new to the Office of English Language Learners. We have a new chancellor, and we really are trying to go out now and really start demystifying a lot of the information that's out there about bilingual, about dual language, and really so that folks know that if you are in a bilingual program, as Claudia was mentioning, doesn't mean that your child would not receive ESL services. So that is something that we as an office and as a Department of Education, we're looking to really provide a campaign to bring awareness around the benefits of being bilingual.
So while you consider the question, where should policymakers and agencies focus their efforts to ensure that ELLs are prepared for college readiness and careers, we'll talk a little bit about some of the initiatives that we're taking on. So one of the first initiatives that we felt very strongly about is parent engagement and community engagement, which is why we're here. We feel that we need to have conversations with all of our constituents and others who may be involved either at the educational level, university level, teachers, parents, because we need to be having these conversations more and making sure that the information is out. We're starting with parents specifically to empower them and make sure that they know their rights as parents, and also that they know their options and all the implications for their options. We're launching a parent academy, a parent conference, and looking to go into the communities, bringing in our advocates and partners so that parents feel comfortable coming to us and asking questions.
Right. And just to add to that piece is that one of the things that we haven't really touched upon, but we may, at the end, we're going to show you a video clip, is the social emotional piece that our English language learners need. So many of our English language learners who are coming here with many different challenges that they have come to even come into this country. So there's things that we know that we have to build trust within the communities, and that we recognize that there has to be wraparound services for these students. So when we're doing our engagement with the community, is not just going to working with large non-for-profit or community-based groups, but is really trying to identify who are those smaller community-based organizations that are within the communities that our ELL families already have trust with, so that they can help us really be kind of a vehicle to really providing those families with information about their rights.
And back to the question about if we all work really hard and really care about the students, things will work well. We agree, but we also believe that there's cultural pieces that being part of the majority culture in the United States, if you do not engage in conversations with our different groups that are coming to this country and understanding their expectations about education, as simple things as their expectations for their daughters versus their sons, and also acknowledging a critical piece that we feel has been lacking is the student voice. Many of our students, we assume that, oh, you're so lucky to be in the United States, this must be your dream come true, when in fact many of them did not have choice and are struggling with that transition. And so we want to make sure that that social emotional piece plays a larger part as we serve our students and prepare them to have the future that they want, that we're doing a better job of preparing our educators to be thoughtful in how they approach it and not assume that what we bring to the conversation is what our students and families are bringing to the conversation. I see
Yeah, I completely agree. Not only making, as I see it, working
Absolutely.
on field focus.
So I know the chancellor mentioned ELLs in her talk this morning. So what kind of support do you feel like you're getting from the DOE in general? And historically, nationwide, is support there or not there?
So that's an amazing question. I feel like we planted you in the audience today. Well, I think the example, we're in a group of learners, but it's important to understand that politically, this is expensive what we're talking about. And we're talking about resources for a group of students, very diverse, but when we talk about them as a whole, it's not a group that is part of that political power base oftentimes. And so access to resources is definitely a struggle, and it should be. When we're asking for resources, we should be able to substantiate why this is important. And again, that goes back to when we're going out in the community, we're making sure that we're engaging parents in a way that they know their rights and become partners with us. Part of that is how American parents engage with the educational system is very different from other countries. And in the United States, the loudest voice, the squeakiest wheel, the letter writers, the emailers, the ones that have the time to go and know who to go to, they get what they want. And like when we talk about dual language instruction, if I was to say to you 70% of our time is going to people who are not entitled, I think it speaks to where we are politically. So what we do is it's our role to provide access, opportunity to the students who are entitled, but to hear all parents. And if we could leverage the demands of those parents to provide access to more students, we feel that's a win-win. Resources internally within the department, we have a new mayor, we have a new chancellor. I think we're part of the conversation. Getting into that speech was not something that happened automatically. We have to advocate, we have to stand up, we have to remind. When we raise our voice, the response is always like, oh, right, of course, because the intent is there, but we can't be silent. And if we need the support of everyone to make sure that we're doing what we believe is best for not only the students who we're serving, but for our city and for our country, we believe this is a really a resource that we have not yet tapped to its potential. These are students who could do things and really provide for our country in ways that we don't even know yet. So we really want to prepare them and tap into what they can bring to the table. So I don't know how we're doing on time.
We're at 5:33.
Okay. 10 minutes about?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I just want to add a point, a data point. Something that we are looking at is actually one of the subgroups that we identified in the beginning, which is former English language learners. If you can walk away with something and thinking about, is that former English language learners that we have learned are outperforming students who have not been identified as English language learners. So so once we could get our students through the ELL programs, once they're in a program that is not an ELL specific program, they're outperforming other students. So that's something to be said about our students.
We also want to make sure that we share that we're open to continuing the conversation. We are looking for ideas. We want to make sure that we're hearing different viewpoints and perspectives to make sure that once we're in that office centrally, our access to the field changes significantly. Even as a school leader, how parents respond to us and students respond to us shifts. So we're always accessible at our email, which is OELL, Office of English Language Learners, @schools.nyc.gov. So we would love to hear from you. And we want to end with by showing you something that if you want to learn more and hear directly from the voice of students, there was a project that was done at the International High Schools.
At Brooklyn Lafayette.
We want to share it with you before we go because we feel like the students say it best.
That I'm a country. My dad said I'm a come to the United States. I'm gonna be here working 3 years, and then I'm gonna go back to Guatemala. He was coming here by halfway in Mexico. He was killed.
Across the room if you are not from the United States.
Our students are recent immigrant English language learners from about 52 different countries.
My country is bigger.
They are the American dream.
The options are to either nurture and support and educate them or not.
It was not a choice for us to come here, and that's something our parents choose.
Coming here is really hard. I was 10, crossing the desert by myself.
We just here on visa, and I mean, we don't have nothing.
The most difficult part is he can speak in English, you know.
Absolutely nobody else speaks this language.
If you hit someone and they press charges, you can go to jail.
What I want to say, I have in my brain, but I can't speak.
I can't imagine what they're going through.
And my dad, like he said, is the age when you were supposed to get married.
I feel very nice when the children is good.
They already chose the boy for me.
All the normal angsty stuff about being a teenager and trying to figure out who you are and what right and wrong is, on top of adjusting to a totally new culture. I mean, it's insane.
You need to realize wherever you choose to be in this world, it's up to you.
My parents want me to put a dress on prom. How am I gonna look with a dress?
Something you want and you can't achieve. Just have to support her.
I feel a little bit different.
Everybody's different here. Different nationality, different people, different dressing, culture, and all of that.
I want to go back to Guatemala, but only to vacation.
This heart is over there and the body is over here.
So this is why we do the work that we do every day. So it's for these students that we want to make sure they have a voice, they have the opportunity, they have access. So we hope that we have left you with some information that you can move forward and start doing some additional digging and really advocating for our students, because we can't do this by ourselves. Claudia and I were all over 7 days a week around the city trying to push and advocate for these students. But I think that's where we go about the student voice. It's so powerful. And these are students that are at Brooklyn Lafayette International School.